Gianna Carter had spent weeks drowning in grief, but now, as she stared at the wall of evidence spread across her dining table, something inside her shifted. The despair that had once pinned her to the floor was gone. In its place was a quiet, burning determination. Penny and Victor had stripped her of everything, her shares, her voice, her reputation. But in their arrogance, they had left fingerprints all over their crimes. They thought she was broken. They thought she was done. They were wrong. The first step was organization. Gianna carefully cataloged each document she had uncovered, building a digital archive with redundancies across multiple encrypted drives. Fraudulent invoices went into one folder, suspicious vendor contracts into another, offshore account activity into a third. She labeled everything meticulously. If anyone tried to bury her findings, she would still have backups ready to surface. But she knew evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed allies, people who still believed in her, people who could help her amplify the truth when the time came. She started small. One night, she reached out to Daniel Kim, a software engineer who had worked under her for 3 years. He was young, brilliant, and loyal, but he had gone quiet after Penny took control. Gianna sent him a single text, "Meet me. No phones. Just trust me." They met at a small diner on the outskirts of the city. Daniel looked nervous, his eyes darting toward the door. "Gia," he whispered, "if anyone sees me." "They won't," she cut in, sliding a folder across the table. "Look at this." Daniel flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing. "These vendors, they don't exist." "Exactly," Gianna said, her voice low but steady. "Penny and Victor are bleeding the company dry. And if it continues, NovaSphere won't survive another year." Daniel looked up, eyes wide. "You can prove this?" "I will," she replied. "But I need your help." Daniel agreed, and with him came access, old server logs, archived communications, pieces of the puzzle Gianna couldn't retrieve on her own. Soon, a small network of quiet allies began to form. A finance analyst who had always admired Gianna's integrity. A secretary who had overheard too many late-night conversations between Penny and Victor. Even a junior marketing associate who confessed, "I never understood why our budgets didn't add up." Each piece of testimony, each whisper, became another nail in Penny and Victor's coffin. But Gianna wasn't reckless. She knew Victor would be watching, sniffing for leaks, ready to crush any resistance. So she worked in silence, moving like a shadow. She used prepaid phones, encrypted email accounts, meetings in crowded places where no one would suspect conspiracy. At night, she pored over Victor's legal frameworks, memorizing their twists and traps. If she wanted to beat him, she had to think like him. And slowly, she began to. One evening, while reviewing Victor's amendments to the shareholder agreements, Gianna spotted something she had missed before. A clause buried in the fine print allowed for emergency shareholder meetings if financial misconduct could be demonstrated with evidence. It was obscure, technical, something no one would ever invoke unless they had absolute proof. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Victor had built his fortress with walls of legalese. But inside those walls, he had left a door. The next step was patience. Gianna resisted the urge to strike immediately. A premature move would only alert Penny and Victor, giving them time to erase the trail. Instead, she let them tighten the noose around themselves. Every week brought new extravagances. Penny photographed at a luxury resort, rumors of a secret penthouse purchased under a shell corporation, whispers of Victor negotiating offshore deals on her behalf. Each indulgence was another thread Gianna could tug. Still, doubt crept in during the quiet hours. Alone at night, she sometimes wondered if she was strong enough to fight them both. Penny had charm, Victor had the law, and she had lost everything. But then she would glance at the framed photo on her shelf, a snapshot from NovaSphere's first office, back when it was just 2 desks in a rented co-working space. Gianna was in the background, laughing with a coffee in hand. Penny was at the front, scribbling ideas on a whiteboard. Back then, it had been about dreams. About building something that mattered. Now, Penny had twisted that dream into greed and betrayal. Gianna clenched her fists. I won't let her destroy it. Her resolve crystallized the night she overheard Penny at a gala, speaking carelessly after too much champagne. NovaSphere is mine now, Penny bragged to a group of investors. Gianna was just dead weight. Without me, she'd be nothing. The words burned, but they also fueled her. Gianna wasn't nothing. She was the architect. The numbers had always been hers, and now the evidence was too. Penny had taken her crown, but Gianna was preparing a blade. Gianna Carter had always built strategies like a chessboard. Numbers were her pawns, contracts her bishops, alliances her rooks. But now, the board wasn't just about profit margins or market expansions, it was survival. She couldn't simply expose Penny and Victor. If she moved too soon, they would bury her with lawsuits and smear campaigns. If she waited too long, NovaSphere would collapse under their corruption, leaving her with nothing to reclaim. The solution had to be surgical, precise, invisible, and devastating. Step 1. Securing the evidence. Gianna knew the documents she already had were powerful, but not bulletproof. Penny could claim the shell companies were subcontractors. Victor could drown her in counterarguments. So Gianna doubled down. With Daniel Kim's help, she built a covert data trail. Every time Victor logged into offshore databases, Daniel captured a fragment of metadata. Every time Penny approved a fraudulent invoice, Gianna stored a time-stamped copy. She encrypted everything across multiple servers, one in Iceland, another in Singapore, with automatic leaks scheduled in case anything happened to her. If they try to silence me, she told Daniel, the truth will speak for itself. Step 2. Planting doubt. Evidence wasn't enough. She needed the board of directors to question Penny's invincibility. Gianna began feeding small, controlled leaks. A whisper to a trusted journalist about unusual spending patterns. An anonymous email to a mid-level investor questioning discrepancies in quarterly reports. The goal wasn't to blow the story open, it was to plant seeds of suspicion. By the time she revealed the full truth, the ground would already be fertile. Step 3. Building allies. Every war required soldiers. Gianna carefully approached 2 former allies on the board, men who had always admired her fiscal discipline but had gone silent under Penny's reign. She didn't ask them to take sides. Instead, she showed them carefully chosen snippets of data. Enough to make them uneasy, but not enough to expose her hand. I'm not asking you to move yet, she whispered during a private meeting at a quiet cafe. Just watch. And when the time comes, remember who told you first. They nodded, uncertainty in their eyes. But uncertainty was enough. It meant Penny's control wasn't absolute. Step 4. The legal trap. Victor Hale's fortress was law, but Gianna had found the crack, the obscure clause allowing for an emergency shareholder meeting if misconduct could be proven. Her plan was simple, assemble a case so strong, so undeniable, that even Victor couldn't twist his way out. Once she invoked the clause, the board would be forced to hear her. And in that room, she would lay out every fraudulent dollar, every offshore transfer, every damning email. But to get there, she had to stay invisible. The counterplay. What Gianna didn't know was that Penny had already begun to suspect her silence. She's too quiet, Penny muttered one night in her penthouse, swirling champagne in her glass. Gianna doesn't disappear like this. Not unless she's planning something. Victor leaned back in his chair, smirking. Then we make sure she has nothing to plan with. Within days, Gianna noticed subtle shifts. A man loitering outside her apartment building, pretending to smoke but never lighting his cigarette. Emails from old contacts suddenly bouncing back. Even Daniel reported his work computer had been randomly audited by IT. They were watching her. The cat and mouse. Gianna adapted quickly. She stopped meeting allies in predictable places, rotating between diners, libraries, and bustling train stations. She carried 2 phones, one for decoys, one encrypted. When Penny's spies shadowed her, she gave them trails of nothing, hours spent in bookstores, aimless walks along the pier, meetings that looked purely social. Behind that facade, her real moves unfolded unseen. Daniel's captures grew into a damning dataset: IP addresses tied to Victor, contracts signed under Penny's digital signature, offshore transactions routed through a Cayman account. Piece by piece, the noose tightened. The psychological war. Gianna also knew how to weaponize fear. She began sending subtle signals to Penny and Victor, anonymous notes slipped into board packets, and signed memos left on Victor's desk. Each contained a single line: "We know." Victor brushed it off at first, but Penny's composure cracked. She snapped at assistants, demanded to know who had access to financial files, even ordered new security protocols. Every ounce of paranoia distracted them from her true plan. The turning point. The climax of her preparation came one night when Daniel burst into her apartment, eyes wide. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping a flash drive onto her desk. On it was a recording, a video conference between Penny and Victor discussing how to bury the Carter problem once and for all. The two laughed as Penny described Gianna as finished, while Victor promised, "If she tries to fight, I'll make sure she never works in this industry again." It wasn't just arrogance. It was evidence. Gianna replayed the clip 3 times, her expression calm, almost serene. For the first time since her fall, she knew she had them. She sat back, hands folded, the city lights flickering outside her window. The plan was nearly complete. Step by step, she had turned her despair into strategy, her isolation into leverage, her pain into fuel. Penny and Victor had built their empire on lies. And now, Gianna Carter was ready to burn it down. Gianna Carter had always known the power of patience. But patience alone wouldn't win her company back. She needed to make the first move, something small, sharp, but impossible to ignore. A spark to test how quickly Penny and Victor would scramble when the fire touched their doorstep. The decision came late one night as she stared at her laptop. On the screen sat a report she and Daniel had built, a clean, irrefutable breakdown of one fraudulent vendor, Blue Horizon Consulting. It wasn't the full arsenal, just one bullet. Enough to wound, not enough to end the war. She drafted an anonymous email to a trusted journalist at Tech Ledger, a reporter known for sniffing out financial irregularities in Silicon Valley. The subject line was simple: "Do you know where NovaSphere's money is going?" Attached was the sanitized report, with just enough breadcrumbs to make it irresistible. Her finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. Once she pressed it, there would be no turning back. Finally, she clicked. The first shot had been fired. 2 days later, the article dropped. Questions arise over NovaSphere's vendor contracts. It was only a 2-page feature, cautious in tone, but the implications were explosive. The journalist cited anonymous sources and inconsistencies in financial reports. The piece questioned why a supposedly cutting-edge company was funneling millions into shadowy firms with no clear track record. The article didn't accuse Penny directly, but the insinuation was clear: something inside NovaSphere was rotten. The effect was immediate. Stock prices dipped 5% in a single afternoon. Investors began calling board members for reassurance. Employees whispered in hallways, sending each other the article with subject lines like, "Have you seen this?" And Penny Dawson? She exploded. "Find out who leaked this," she shouted during an emergency board call, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I want names, I want answers, and I want this buried before it grows. Victor, ever the calm shadow, soothed her with promises. It's a hit piece with no foundation. We'll discredit the journalist, threaten legal action if necessary. The board won't panic as long as we look unified. But Penny wasn't reassured. For the first time, cracks showed in her polished armor. Meanwhile, Gianna watched from the sidelines, hidden in plain sight. At a quiet cafe, she listened as two NovaSphere employees at the next table gossiped nervously. Do you think it's true? I mean, Blue Horizon doesn't even have a website. I don't know, but if investors start asking questions. Gianna sipped her coffee, eyes lowered, a faint smile playing on her lips. The seeds were sprouting. But the move wasn't without danger. Within days, Victor tightened security protocols inside NovaSphere. Employees' emails were monitored, access logs scrutinized. Penny hired a private investigator to look into potential internal leaks. Daniel sent Gianna a panicked message, they're hunting. If they find me. Gianna responded quickly, stay calm. They won't. This wasn't you. This was me. For the first time, she revealed to him that she had taken the risk herself. Daniel was stunned into silence, then finally typed back, you're braver than any of them know. The tension escalated when Penny held a press conference to control the narrative. Standing before flashing cameras, she wore a flawless white suit, projecting innocence and authority. These accusations are baseless, she declared with a practiced smile. NovaSphere operates with full transparency. Any suggestion otherwise is simply the work of bitter, disgruntled individuals who no longer have a place in this company's bright future. Gianna's name wasn't spoken, but the barb was clear. The board applauded Penny's poise, but behind closed doors, murmurs grew louder. Investors didn't like uncertainty, and now NovaSphere had plenty of it. For Gianna, this was the victory she needed, not in headlines, but in hesitation. Her logic had been sound. That night, Gianna sat by her window, the city lights flickering like signals on a vast board. She knew Penny and Victor would strike back, they had to. But she was ready. The first spark had been lit, and now the blaze was spreading. For the first time since her betrayal, Gianna felt in control. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was war. The boardroom of NovaSphere's glass tower had never been so tense. Around the long mahogany table, directors whispered to one another, clutching printed copies of the Tech Ledger article. Stock prices had fallen another 3% that morning. Investors were nervous. Rumors were everywhere. At the head of the table, Penny Dawson radiated false calm. She wore an emerald suit, her smile bright, her tone honeyed. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, I assure you, these whispers are nothing but smoke. NovaSphere is stronger than ever. The press loves a scandal, but we are not going to dignify baseless gossip. Victor Hale sat beside her, his hands folded, his voice a measured echo. Our legal team is preparing to respond with a defamation suit. This will be resolved swiftly. Please, let's not allow paranoia to dictate decisions. For a moment, the board seemed soothed. Then the door opened. Gasps swept the room as Gianna Carter walked in. She wore no power suit, only a black blazer over a simple blouse, but the weight of her presence filled the air. Hello, she said evenly. I believe I still have the right to attend as a shareholder. Penny's smile cracked, though only slightly. Gianna. How surprising. Victor's eyes narrowed. You no longer hold controlling interest. You cannot speak here. Gianna placed a heavy folder on the table. Actually, I can. Section 14.2 of the amended shareholder agreement allows for an emergency session if credible evidence of misconduct exists. She locked eyes with Victor. You remember that clause, don't you? You wrote it. A ripple of unease passed through the board. Gianna opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. Her voice was calm, precise, the way it had always been when presenting financial models. This, she said, sliding forward an invoice, is Blue Horizon Consulting. A vendor supposedly hired for cybersecurity audits. It has no employees, no physical office. The address is a P.O. box in Nevada. Another document. Here is Eastgate Partners. Paid $1.1 million for a strategic expansion study. The same P.O. box. The same signatures. She pulled out bank records. Here are the wire transfers, millions routed offshore to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts authorized by this man. Her gaze locked on Victor. The room went silent. Penny laughed, but it was brittle. This is absurd. Anyone can forge documents. She's a disgruntled ex-founder trying to drag us down. Gianna pressed a button on her laptop. A screen flickered to life, projecting onto the boardroom wall. A video clip played, Penny and Victor on a late-night call, Penny's voice slurred with champagne. Gianna was just dead weight, Penny sneered in the video. Without me, she'd be nothing. Victor replied, smirking, if she fights, I'll make sure she never works in this industry again. The clip ended. No one spoke. For the first time, Penny's mask slipped. That was taken out of context. Gianna cut her off. And here are the timestamps, IP addresses, and internal logs, all verified. You can deny me, but you cannot deny the math. Every missing dollar, every false vendor, every fraudulent contract, it's all here. She turned to the board, her voice steady. You trusted me once, when this company was just 2 desks in a rented office. I built NovaSphere's financial foundation. I protected it when no one else believed in us. And I am telling you now, if you let this continue, NovaSphere will collapse under the weight of corruption. She let the silence stretch, letting the evidence settle like a storm cloud. The directors exchanged uneasy looks. One cleared his throat. Ms. Dawson, these figures, they're deeply concerning. Another added, if even half of this is true, we're looking at criminal liability. Penny's voice rose, sharper than intended. Don't you dare believe her. She's nothing. She's bitter because she lost. Everything she says is a lie. But Victor remained still, his composure cracking only at the edges. His eyes darted to the documents, scanning for flaws, for loopholes. But Gianna had anticipated every counter. She had built her case like a fortress. Then came the final blow. Gianna pulled out a single-page summary, a timeline mapping each fraudulent transaction to Penny's luxury purchases, her penthouse, her international trips, her gala fundraisers. The dates lined up perfectly. Here is your visionary, Gianna said coldly. Not a leader. A thief. The boardroom erupted. Some shouted, some demanded explanations, others simply sat in stunned silence. Penny tried to shout over them, her voice shrill, but no one was listening anymore. Victor finally spoke, his tone clipped. We should recess. These are serious accusations, but proper procedure. No, one director snapped. We've heard enough. If we delay, the damage will only spread. We must act now. A vote was called. Hands went up, one after another, until the majority was overwhelming. Effective immediately, Penny Dawson was suspended as CEO pending investigation. Victor Hale was placed under review, his access revoked. Gianna watched it unfold with steady eyes. The empire they had stolen from her was crumbling in real time. For the first time in months, she felt the ground beneath her steady again. She wasn't back in control, Not yet. But the truth was no longer hidden, and the tide had turned. As Penny was escorted from the room, her eyes burned with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. Gianna didn't flinch. "You're right," she said softly. "It's just beginning." The suspension of Penny Dawson sent shockwaves through NovaSphere. News outlets feasted on the scandal. NovaSphere CEO under investigation for fraud, blared the headlines. Investors demanded clarity, employees whispered in corridors, and regulators began circling like hawks. But the war wasn't over. If Penny was a firebrand burning out, Victor Hale was the cold ember still plotting in the dark. Victor's countermove. Victor knew Penny was finished. He could see it in the way board members avoided her calls, in the way journalists now described her with words like lavish and reckless. But Victor wasn't about to sink with her. He had built a career on survival, on slipping away when the ground gave out. So, while Penny spiraled, Victor launched his counterattack. He filed an injunction against Gianna, accusing her of illegally accessing proprietary company data. He claimed the evidence she had presented was stolen, doctored, and inadmissible. In the same breath, he hinted to select journalists that Gianna's return was nothing more than a revenge campaign from a bitter ex-founder. For a moment, it worked. Headlines shifted. Was the whistleblower's evidence legal? Analysts debated whether Gianna had gone too far. Doubt crept back into the narrative. Penny's desperation. Meanwhile, Penny clung to whatever scraps of power she had left. She appeared on a late-night talk show, dressed in black to project solemnity, insisting she was the victim of a smear campaign. Gianna was always jealous, she said, her eyes glistening with fake tears. She couldn't stand that I had the vision, the leadership. This is just her attempt to destroy me. But the performance rang hollow. Social media lit up with side-by-side images, Penny's crocodile tears next to photos of her penthouse, her luxury vacations, her designer gowns. The public wasn't buying it. Still, Victor's legal play threatened to muddy the waters. Gianna's response. Gianna had anticipated this. She knew Victor would try to weaponize the law. So she had prepared her own trap. She called a press conference in the same glass tower where Penny once flaunted her power. Standing before a sea of cameras, Gianna didn't flinch. "Yes," she said calmly, "I accessed documents. Because fraud was being committed. And here's the thing about fraud, it leaves trails." She clicked a remote. Screens lit up behind her with data charts, wire transfers, and, most damning of all, emails not just signed by Penny but co-signed by Victor himself. These weren't just Penny's crimes, Gianna declared. They were enabled, covered, and executed with legal precision by her advisor, Victor Hale. The journalists erupted. The collapse of Victor Hale. Victor's mask cracked for the first time. Regulators subpoenaed his records within hours. The offshore accounts he thought untouchable. Gianna had already mapped them. The metadata Daniel had collected tied every login, every transfer, directly to Victor's credentials. Cornered, Victor tried to negotiate behind the scenes. He offered the board a deal: sacrifice Penny, let him stay as legal counsel, and he would ensure a smooth transition. But the board wasn't interested. They had tasted the truth, and it was poison. By the week's end, Victor Hale was forced to resign. Days later, federal agents escorted him from his office, his carefully constructed empire unraveling in full view of the cameras. Penny's final plea. Penny, stripped of allies, tried one last time to claw her way back. She barged into a board meeting, demanding reinstatement, claiming she had been misled by Victor. "It wasn't me," she screamed. "I trusted him, he tricked me. You can't take this company from me. I am NovaSphere." Gianna stood calmly, watching her former partner unravel. There was no anger left, only clarity. You were NovaSphere once, Gianna said softly. But you betrayed it. And me. The board voted unanimously. Penny Dawson was permanently removed, her shares frozen pending legal proceedings. Gianna's return. In the aftermath, the board turned to Gianna. They asked her to step in, not just as a shareholder but as a leader. Some wanted her as interim CEO, others as chair of the board. She accepted the role with measured grace. NovaSphere was built on a vision of integrity and innovation, she said in her first speech. That vision was corrupted, but it is not gone. We will rebuild, not with illusions, but with truth. Employees who had once avoided her now applauded. Investors, once wary, expressed renewed confidence. The tide had turned completely. As she stood in the boardroom, the skyline glittering behind her, Gianna felt the weight of the moment. She had been betrayed, erased, humiliated. But she had risen, armed not with vengeance but with truth and strategy. And now, she was back where she belonged, at the helm. The empire that had nearly been stolen was hers again. And this time, no one would take it from her. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner of NovaSphere's gleaming headquarters. Reporters still crowded the lobby, regulators sifted through mountains of evidence, and employees whispered in corridors, trying to reconcile the company's near collapse with the promise of renewal. At the center of it all stood Gianna Carter. She no longer wore the look of a woman betrayed. Her eyes were sharper, her voice steadier, her presence undeniable. The same board that once allowed Penny to erase her name now turned to her with trust and expectation. The company had been scarred, but scars, Gianna knew, could become a foundation for strength. Rebuilding the dream. Her first act as interim CEO was not revenge, it was reform. She launched a full audit, exposing every shadow Penny and Victor had cast. Millions in fraudulent spending were traced, clawed back, and redirected into research and development. She reinstated transparency at every level. Financial reports were open to the board in real time, and whistleblower protections were written into policy. We lost our way, she told employees in her first town hall meeting. But we will rebuild on honesty, not illusion. On substance, not spectacle. The room erupted in applause. For the first time in months, employees felt pride again. Penny's fate. Outside NovaSphere, Penny Dawson's world collapsed. Her frozen assets left her penthouse empty, her designer gowns repossessed by creditors. Paparazzi followed her every move, no longer praising her style but mocking her downfall. She was indicted on charges of embezzlement and fraud, her once polished image reduced to tabloid fodder. The woman who craved the spotlight now found it merciless, burning her instead of celebrating her. Her final act of defiance came in the form of a bitter interview. Gianna ruined me, she hissed into the camera. She took everything. But viewers weren't convinced. They saw not a victim, but a fallen idol, undone by her own greed. Victor's downfall. Victor Hale fared no better. His reputation as a brilliant legal mind was obliterated overnight. With regulators dismantling his offshore empire, he was disbarred and charged with conspiracy. He had spent his career constructing cages for others, but now he sat in one himself. In court, when the prosecution read out the evidence Gianna had uncovered, Victor didn't even raise his head. For the first time, the man who had always controlled the narrative had no words left to say. Gianna's redemption. For Gianna, the victory was not just about regaining control, it was about reclaiming herself. The world finally saw her for who she was, the architect, the strategist, the true founder of NovaSphere. Media outlets that once erased her name now hailed her as the woman who outplayed Betrayal. Investors, impressed by her resilience, poured fresh capital into NovaSphere. Employees, inspired by her courage, rallied behind her. Even rivals in Silicon Valley admitted, albeit grudgingly, that Gianna Carter had done the impossible. She had come back from exile and rebuilt stronger than before. The final board meeting. Months later, the board gathered again in the same room where Gianna had once been humiliated. But this time, she sat at the head of the table, not as a silenced shareholder, but as NovaSphere's permanent CEO. She looked around the room, her gaze calm. When this company was born, it was about vision. We lost that when greed replaced integrity. But we've survived the betrayal, and now we move forward, not just to compete, but to lead. The directors nodded, some with pride, others with relief. The vote was unanimous. Gianna Carter was officially, and irrevocably, the queen of NovaSphere. The lesson. Later that evening, alone in her office, Gianna stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who trusted too easily, who believed friendship was unshakable. That girl had been broken. But from the pieces, she had built someone stronger. She had learned that betrayal could destroy, but it could also forge steel. That power wasn't in titles or magazine covers, it was in truth, resilience, and the courage to fight when the world counted you out. And most of all, she had learned never to underestimate herself again. The ending. Across town, headlines buzzed with Penny's trial and Victor's conviction. But inside NovaSphere, work continued, new products launched, partnerships grew, and the company's value soared higher than ever. Employees spoke of Gianna with reverence now. Investors called her the comeback story of the decade. And the public saw her not as a victim, but as a survivor who had turned betrayal into triumph. As dawn broke, casting golden light over the glass tower, Gianna whispered to herself, almost like a vow. They tried to erase me. But I wrote myself back in. And this time, her story would endure.
Thanks for watching.